Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Tea Leaves and Tourniquets, a Lesbian Romance, by Sienna Waters, narrated by Anna Fox. Chapter 1. The sidewalk at the corner was so covered in cracks that Jaye had to practically dance to avoid them all. "Hope you're appreciating this, Mom," she said, under her breath, as she finally put her foot down on a full paving stone. Not that her mother was likely to care too much, what with being dead and all, but still, step on a crack, break your mother's back. It was the thought that counted, right? At least the rest of the walk was fairly crack-free. Lanport was a pretty little town, the ocean licking at the beach on one side of the boardwalk, a line of crooked, picturesque shops on the other side. Pretty and popular, especially at the coming time of year. Jaye took a deep breath, drinking in the combination of salt and suntan cream and home. Over 30, and this was the only home she'd ever known. Not that that was a bad thing. She loved Lanport. It was home. And who didn't love being exactly where they belonged, where they knew everyone, and where everyone knew them? She'd left, obviously. She'd traveled, seen the sights, drunk the drinks, met the people. But she always ended up right back here. And this was her absolute favorite time of year. She scratched at her forearm, drinking in the sight of the ocean. The sun was just beginning to glint off the waves, and the sky promised real heat for the first time in the year. There was expectation in the air. The inns and hostels and hotels weren't packed yet, but they would be soon. Then real summer would start. Real summer with its exotic people, its parties and sunbathers, its accidents and proposals and everything in between. There was nothing like a bunch of strangers coming to town to make you feel like you really belonged. Odd, but true. Light was gleaming on the water, and in her head she was mixing the colors on her palette, adding just a touch of royal blue, just a smidge of olive green and a hint of white, mentally replicating the exact color. She was so intent on the exact color, in fact, that she almost missed it. Crap! She stopped, foot in midair, just before she stepped under the ladder. With a sigh, she stepped back and rerouted herself. Maxine getting her sign repainted, just like she did every summer, so that her garish advertisement for real English fish and chips could be read from the beach. Jaye glanced again at the water. England lying thousands of miles away across it. She was pretty sure Maxine had never been there, just as she was pretty sure that the real English chips were solid American fries, fresh from Sam's Club. Watch it! She turned just as the white paint sloshed out of the man's can and splashed over her foot. What the? Why aren't you watching where you're going? He pulled the paint can back and glared at her. Why aren't you? She snapped, looking down at the smear of white on her sneaker. The shoes were ruined, and it wasn't like she was flush enough that she could buy another pair right now. Who the hell walks out into the street instead of staying on the sidewalk? Jaye raised an eyebrow. Someone trying not to walk under a ladder? He glared at her for a second longer, then grinned. Well, looks like you'd have been luckier to take the unlucky route then, doesn't it, love? She was desperately trying to come up with some kind of witty retort when she heard the restaurant door unlock behind her, and Maxine's head stuck out. All right, Jaye. She looked down at her shoe once more, then up at the man who was still grinning at her misfortune, and then over at Maxine. She shrugged. Not an auspicious day, I'm afraid. Maxine scratched her nose. It'll be even less auspicious if you're late opening up. Bobby catches you even a minute late and she'll have your head. True. Though how exactly her aunt would know that she was late opening up the shop was another question. As far as she knew, Bobby was currently getting her regular checkup at the hospital the next town over, accompanied by her assistant, general shop opener, and Jay's best friend, Cece. Bobby would know, though. Bobby had eyes in the back of her head. Or in the back of her crystal ball, at any rate. Jay nodded at the painter, threw Maxine a wave, and hurried on her way. The Far Seer was the third from the last shop along the boardwalk. As its name implied, a pyramid of crystal balls glittered in the window. Not real crystal balls. Even Jay wasn't that gullible. The real ones were under the counter. The ones in the window were just for show. A forest of crystals hung from the ceiling, and the shop shelves were littered with books and charms and small displays of leather bracelets and pretty postcards. All except for the back wall, which was reserved for paintings large and small, hung all together so that from a distance they looked like a patchwork quilt. Jay flicked the lights on, turned the sign to open, and stuck her head through to the back room, just long enough to click the coffee machine on. The place smelled of incense and patchouli, though Bobby's upstairs apartment smelled the same, so maybe the scent was coming from there. Jay unlocked the cash register and propped herself up on a stool, surveying her realm. Well, not her realm exactly. The Far Seer had belonged to her mother, Rachel. Jay knew the place intimately, inside and out, from the creaky floorboard on the second stair to the funky shelf by the window that collapsed if you put a crystal on it, but strangely could bear the weight of 20 books, no problem. When her mother had died, the place had been passed down to her sister Roberta, Bobby, Aunt Bobby. Jay guessed that things had just happened too quickly, with her mother buying the shop, having a baby, and then getting sick. All so fast there had been no time for estate planning and the like. No time to leave an inheritance to a child that was so shiny and new that her mother hadn't even gotten used to her name yet. But Bobby had come, and Bobby had slipped into Jay's life like she'd belonged there. They'd rubbed along just fine. And when Jay's 18th birthday had come along and Bobby had offered to turn over the deeds to the shop, Jay couldn't bring herself to take them. The Far Seer seemed like the smallest price to pay for having her big, loud, wonderful aunt in her life. A price far too small to pay someone who had raised her and cherished her and loved her when she really didn't have to. So, technically, the shop was Bobby's. Cece worked behind the counter when she wasn't ferrying Bobby to hospital to get her diabetes checkup. And Jay? Well, Jay had other fish to fry. Sardines, mostly, rather than the big old mahi-mahi that she'd dreamed of. But she was sure that the world had something in store for her. Sure that fate had a plan. She'd just stirred herself to pour a cup of fragrant coffee when the bell over the door rang. A tall, slim man in chinos and a linen shirt was curiously looking around the shop. He flashed her a smile with bright white teeth. A tourist, for sure. Jay didn't think anyone in Lanport had teeth that white. "Can I help?" "Actually, I was looking for a present for my niece. She's into all this occult stuff." Jay bit her tongue. The Far Seer wasn't occult, and she resented the implication. But the guy was a customer. "I'd suggest maybe a tarot set," she said, pointing him in the right direction. She finished pouring her coffee as he made his choice. Then he came to the counter, blue eyes all a-sparkle, and she smiled, despite his crack about the occult. He really did have very nice eyes. "They're pretty good," he said, nodding over to the paintings on the wall as he put his chosen pack of cards on the counter. "They yours?" "All mine," she said, as she rang the price up. "They're great, really professional." Really far better than I'd have thought to find somewhere like this. And again, that judgment. That sense that he knew better and bigger. Jaye said nothing. The paintings were good, she knew that. She knew she had talent. And she knew that painting her days away and squeezing out a living from private art lessons and classes at the local school wasn't the career she'd dreamed of having. But then, the universe had a plan for her. She just kind of wished that the universe would hurry up and unveil the plan because she was getting a little tired of waiting. $12.50, she said. He handed over the money and stepped closer to the counter. Any chance of getting your number? He asked. Maybe grabbing a drink later? His eyes really were sparkly, and his teeth were as white as his expensive shirt, and he appreciated art. But Jaye looked down at the splodge of white paint on her shoe and scratched idly at her forearm. Today was not an auspicious day, she reminded herself. Definitely not the kind of day to start something that could be serious. Sorry, she said with a bland smile. I'm already taken. A lie. She passed the tarot pack back to him. Thanks for shopping at the Farseer. Have a great day. She watched him disappear out into the bright sunlight and sighed. He could have been the one. He could have been the first sign of the universe's plan. Except today was not a lucky day. She scratched her arm again and wondered how Bobby was doing at the hospital. Chapter 2. Charlie slammed her hands on the steering wheel and cursed. The blue one-way sign that was the object of her wrath stared innocently back, until she jammed the car into reverse and backed off. Somehow, somewhere, there had to be a way to where she wanted to go. The address was plugged neatly into her sat-nav, which was the same sat-nav that 20 minutes ago had attempted to drive her off a ramp into the ocean, chirping brightly that her destination was imminent. She drove down the narrow street carefully and slowly, seeing a glint of blue at the end, and knowing that she was seeing the ocean. The ocean was supposed to calm her. That had been part of the plan. Right now, the sight of the water made her turn the air blue with cursing again. She carried on toward it, though, since she was on yet another one-way street and didn't exactly have any choice. At the end of the street, she turned right and was spit out onto what she assumed was the main thoroughfare, a creaky old boardwalk with the tacky lights of an amusement park at the end. A bunch of decrepit-looking shops with peeling paint and kitsch souvenirs lined one side of the street. So this was Lanport, a town designed around a one-way labyrinth apparently to keep visitors from finding their accommodation. A neat trick. The only way she could see herself eating the advertised real English fish and chips was if she couldn't get into her own rented kitchen, which was a serious possibility at this point. Just as she was about to start cursing again, she spotted a street sign. Turning the car, she drove for a further minute before, miracle of miracles, she actually found the street she was looking for. Then she started cursing again, because where the hell was she supposed to find a parking space on a street that was barely wider than her car? A solid 15 minutes later, which was 10 minutes later than her appointment, she finally climbed out of the car. Glancing around, she saw no one and figured that her luggage would be safe enough in the trunk for now. She didn't fancy carrying it into what she was now sure was going to be a far from satisfactory rental apartment. The street was narrow, and the houses were crooked, and she couldn't think how she was going to live somewhere that looked as though it had been designed as some kind of film set for one of those terrible teenage wizard or elf movies. "Ms. Riley?" The woman that stepped out of the doorway was tall and dressed in green pants, a white shirt, and both a jaunty bow tie and a pair of suspenders. Slight overkill, Charlie couldn't help but think. She nodded, not bothering to correct the woman. "I'm Lee, from the Realtor?" Charlie nodded again, and the woman stared at her. Her short back and sides was so short back and sides that she could see a tan line where the too recent haircut had happened. So, shall we go inside? The woman seemed shaken somehow, or wrong-footed by Charlie's lack of speech. Charlie finally remembered her tongue. Yes, she said brusquely. I think you'll find everything to your liking, Lee said, as Charlie followed her up the stairs. She was better now that they were going inside, going into her professional spiel. I'll be the judge of that. Oh, right. Lee glanced backward and then continued up to the third floor. Charlie looked around. The carpet was frayed at the edges. The walls had a streak of grime where too many elbows had brushed against them. There was no way in hell she was staying here. She'd have to figure something else out. She should never have trusted a website to find her a place to stay. She should have... Her thoughts were interrupted by Lee unlocking a door. Charlie could see bright light flooding out of the apartment. After you, Lee said, standing to one side and gesturing, as though she were a knight allowing her lady to pass. Charlie ignored the flirtatious gesture and stepped into the apartment. Tall, wide windows covered one wall, overlooking a small terrace, and then the blue and green of the ocean. The floors were wooden and polished, the furniture pine and minimalist. The only painting was a seascape over a white couch, and a tiny kitchen perched in one corner of the otherwise open-plan main room. Through a half-open door, Charlie could see a neatly made bed. Yes, she thought. Yes, she could do this. Better than she'd thought. She strolled over to the windows, stepped out onto the terrace, and looked down at the creaky old boardwalk. This must have been a nice town once, she thought, when it was new and fresh, when people vacationed here rather than Mexico or Thailand or Europe, when coming to the ocean was a longed-for treat, something to dream of. Nowadays, all kids dreamed of was video games and new sneakers. She breathed in deeply. The air had a tang of salt. So, what do you think? She turned around, finding that Lee had joined her on the terrace. It's a bit quiet, isn't it? Yes, she needed quiet. After everything, quiet was good. Quiet had been high on her list of priorities when looking for a plan, as had being close to the ocean. But this place seemed hardly big enough to support a local shop, let alone anything else. Lee grinned. School just finished around these parts. Give it another day or two and you'll see a different side of town. All the summer families will be moving in. She pointed over to where the bay curved, where a series of large houses littered the cliffs. Then the tourists will come. Day trippers and the like. It gets busier then. If it didn't, then Lanport wasn't going to be quite the distraction she'd thought it would be. Definitely, Lee said. She hesitated for a second, and Charlie saw that her bow tie had small dogs on it. If you're new in town and want someone to show you around, I could... No, Charlie said, turning and walking back inside. Some might have said that she was heartless. But in Charlie's world, it was better to communicate quickly and precisely. She didn't want to go out with the woman. Not that she had a problem with women in jaunty bow ties asking her out. She honestly didn't. But she wasn't getting involved. She was better off without anyone. This whole plan was designed to keep her away from people, to give her time to work things out, to try and get some sense of order in her head, to... I'll leave the keys right here by the door, then, Lee said, coming inside and not looking her in the eye. Was this where she was going to spend the next couple of months? Charlie took one more look around. Yes, she decided, Yes, this would work. Thank you. Where's the clinic from here? Lee paused, hand on doorknob. The clinic? Go right out of the front door and take the next right after that. You can't miss it. But I'm afraid it's closed. Old Doc Howard. I know all about Doc Howard, Charlie said crisply. The health authorities had been very clear on what had happened. She'd demanded an explanation before agreeing to anything. And the clinic will reopen tomorrow. How can you possibly know that? Charlie attempted a smile that she wasn't sure was effective, because Lee stepped back. I'm the new doctor. Doctor. The title still gave her shivers, just as it had the first time she'd used it. Just as it had the first time she'd said it out loud. Now, though, it had an added frisson, a barely containable anxiety about the word. She tightened her smile, trying to make it a little better. You? Lee said, disbelief in her eyes. Then she remembered who she was and where. She turned disbelief into a welcoming smile. Welcome to Lanport, she managed. Charlie nodded. You have the signed lease, I believe? Lee nodded. Then your job here is done. I assume you can show yourself downstairs. There was a tiny moment where the air was uncomfortable, and then the young realtor let herself out, and Charlie breathed out, alone at last. Alone in Lanport. For the next 2.5 months. If she closed her eyes, she could hear the sounds of the hospital. The constant beeping of monitors, the ringing of phones, the clatter of trolley wheels on the linoleum floor, the ambulance sirens in the distance. She opened her eyes wide again and heard only the hushing of the ocean. Yes, it was for the best that she was here, at least temporarily. In a couple of months' time, she'd have to decide what to do next. But for now, this was good. She needed to go and get her bags. But first, she slid her phone out of her pocket. She needed to text Rain and tell her that she'd arrived just fine. Otherwise, she'd worry. That was what Rain did. Worried. Sometimes too much. Other times, just not enough. Chapter 3. It was close to lunchtime by the time the shop bell rang and a grumbling Bobby bustled her way in, followed closely by Cece. Problems? Jaye asked, raising an eyebrow. Problems? Echoed her aunt. New road, my ass. I swear to God it took twice as long to get to the damn hospital as it does going the old way around. It didn't, Cece said. And then we waited for near as long just to see the doctor. We didn't, added Cece. And the whole damn place still smells like wet paint and sawdust. Okay, it kind of does, Cece said. But the hospital is new. It'll get better. She turned to Jaye. It's super swanky. Flat screens in the waiting room and everything. Bobby harumphed. I don't need to spend my time watching TV. All I wanted was to see the doctor. A doctor that I should damn well be able to see in my own damn town. All of this talk and none of the information she needed. Jaye took a breath. Her aunt and Cece together were a force of nature, and if she wasn't careful, she'd get her ear talked off. She raised her voice just a little as Bobby started to complain again about the state of the new road. And what did the doctor say? Bobby gave her a narrow look. Counting your inheritance already? Jaye rolled her eyes. I'm worried. Now, what did he or she say? Everything's fine, Cece said. Nothing to worry about. Numbers are good, blood sugar is good. But things would be drastically improved if somebody would consent to losing a little weight. Nothing new there, then, Jaye said, eyeing her aunt's bulk. It's my diabetes, said Bobby. I'll feed it if I want. Speaking of which, it's lunchtime. So unless either of you have any objections, I'm going to make myself something to eat. Why would we object? Asked Cece. Dunno. You might be planning on starving me, Bobby said, maneuvering herself behind the counter. Jaye stopped her with a hug, pulling in close, smelling the rose and patchouli scent of her, the comforting feeling of her aunt's arms closing around her. I'm glad you're okay, she whispered. Bobby squeezed her a little tighter before letting her go. So am I, kiddo, she whispered back. And Jaye could see the little glimmer of fear in Bobby's blue eyes. For as long as she could remember, Bobby had been the rock. Big and boisterous and solid, that was Bobby. Indomitable. Bobby had squashed bullies like bugs, had run roughshod over teachers, had protected and fought for her niece any time it was necessary, and sometimes when it wasn't. The diabetes diagnosis had come as a shock to them both. A reminder of Bobby's mortality. A little taste of a sadness to come. Bobby squeezed her hand and then bustled into the back room, disappearing until Jaye could hear her clumping up the steps to her apartment. Thanks for that, Jaye said, turning to Cece. Not a problem. I've got a car. There's no reason not to use it sometimes. I was happy to help out. Cece had been Jaye's best friend since elementary school. With red curls and red cheeks and sparkly hazel eyes, Cece stood out in a crowd. She was stubborn and funny and loyal and knew every single detail about Jaye's life. She'd worked at the Farseer since they were both teenagers, and sometimes Jaye thought that Cece was more related to Bobby than she was. They both shared a certain solidity. More than that, though, both Bobby and Cece were special. Whilst Jaye would admit when pressed to being superstitious, though she hated the connotations of the word, her aunt and her best friend had the gift, or claimed to have it. She'd never doubted Bobby's connection to the other side. But the first time Cece had read her tarot, she'd gotten hysterical and spoiled the entire experience. Somehow, she'd found it hard to connect the Joker best friend with a serious medium. But this hadn't been a fad that Cece had grown out of. Instead, it had been something that Jaye had grown slowly more comfortable with over time. Shop all right? Cece asked, ditching her jacket and purse behind the counter. Jaye gave her a brief rundown on her day so far, including the ladder incident and the tourist with the white teeth. He sounded nice, Cece said. Why didn't you at least meet him for a drink or something? Not an auspicious day, Jaye said. She sniffed. Besides, it's all right for you. You've got Finn. Speaking of which, he'll be here to eat lunch with me in a half hour or so. Want a cup of tea first? Jaye's hands itched to get back to painting, but Cece was wiggling her eyebrows. What? I'll read your leaves, come on. Maybe it's not as inauspicious a day as you think. Jaye scratched at her forearm. Fine. Go on, then. You ought to get that scene, too, Cece said, sipping at her tea and nodding toward Jaye's arm. Jaye stopped scratching and examined the red scaly patch that had developed. It had been itching for days now. Probably some kind of allergy, she'd figured. It's nothing. If it's nothing, then stop scratching it. Jaye sat on her right hand, picking up her tea with her left. Happy? Cece sniffed and sipped, and the shop was quiet except for the creaking floorboards overhead as Bobby prepared her lunch. Do you ever want more? Jaye blinked and put her tea down. What? You heard me, Cece said. Do you ever want more? Like, I don't know, a move to the big city or a mysterious benefactor or a tall, dark, handsome stranger or something. Getting cold feet about being with Finn? Cece snorted. Never. He's the one for me. That was decided years and years ago. And I wasn't talking about me. I was talking about you. I'm meant to be here. A comfortable job, a comfortable relationship, a comfortable life. But a small life.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?